Shalom, everyone. Welcome to the new participants in this webinar, and welcome back to the several hundreds who are joining us again to this second session about the war. Um, I'm Professor Amos Nadan, head of the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies, the largest, by far, Middle East research center in Israel. Joining me this evening is Professor Meir Litvak, who heads our sister institute, the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies. Both of our centers are based at Tel Aviv University, and we work closely together on a wide range of regional issues. With us today, also several researchers from the Dayan Center and the Alliance Center. As with last time, I won't mention all their names now. In short, everyone here is brilliant and exceptional. I also want to thank Richard Sincere and Ricky Alon, who are with us, co-chairs of the Moshe Dayan Center Advisory Board, for encouraging us to organize these English language sessions. Now, let's move to the Middle East. 626 days ago, on October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a brutal invasion into Israel, murdering, to say the least, hundreds of civilians and security personnel, and kidnapping many others. At that moment, there was a very real fear for Israel's security, surrounded by enemies in what's known as the axis of resistance, whose declared goal to destroy Israel and targeted Jews, and after that, of course, to target the so-called infidels more broadly. Today, the picture has changed significantly. If in the first several months of the war, Israel tried to achieve small tactical victories and restore a measure of deterrence, it is now achieve a level of deterrence in the region greater than it's had in the last several decades. In the north, Hezbollah is not fighting anymore. Syria now has a new president who, despite his jihadist background, may be interested in normalizing relations with Israel. Iran, practically surrounded. They agreed to a ceasefire without achieving their aims, and instead suffered significant destruction and losses. The only remaining active part of the axis of resistance are the Houthis in Yemen, who speaks loudly but have done almost nothing in the recent days, and Hamas in Gaza, which has lost the war but continues to hold Israeli hostages as human shields. Hamas still demands the basic condition to bring back our hostages is the right to survive. While a broader, more permanent agreement with Iran is not entirely in Israel's hands, and we saw a reminder today by Trump saying, don't, but now to Israel, it is in Israel's hands to reach an agreement in Gaza. The IDF has given what it can, but we are now seeing diminishing returns from the military campaign. In fact, even negative return as the hostages continue to die. A part of Hamas, the last active part of the axis of religions are the Houthis that speak a lot, but do, as I said, nothing. So it's likely that for them, at least, Israel would strike again, but the main phase of war seems to be over. Now, it may sound strange right now, but the Abraham Accords are likely to expand once the dust settles. In the language of the Middle East, Israel is now stronger than it was in the last several decades, and so now it's time to gain from this bloody war. As for Gaza, Egypt and Jordan are actively working on the day after plan, hoping for Israel to approve it. If that happened, they, Israel First regional allies, are likely to benefit as well. As I said, the geopolitical environment has changed. Now the time for strategic positioning and diplomacies. We're hearing growing calls from a wide range of countries to move from military action to political negotiation. To do that wisely, policymakers will need insights from people who study the region in depth, and that's where we come in. So let's move forward to a set of short expert analysis. Each speaker will have about 7 minutes, and with that, after that, we'll move to questions. Please feel free to submit them using the Q&A function in the webinar. And with that, I hand things over to my colleague and friend, Professor Meir Litvak, the head of the Dayan Center for Middle Eastern Studies.
Hello, hi, good afternoon, good evening. I'm very glad to join the webinar and to continue our very fruitful cooperation with the Dayan Center. I will speak about Iran with the declaration of the ceasefire. Let me say that Iran certainly suffered a blow or a loss in this round, but I will say, if you use the terms from the boxing world, it was not a knockout, but Iran lost in points for the time being. And the result is that we can speak of maybe two schools. If we looked at the war, we could see two schools in Iran. One that was visible from the start, wanted to end the war very quickly. And we had statements from Iran Foreign Minister and others who said that Iran would stop the launching missiles the moment Israel would stop bombing them. The other school, and the reason for that, of course, was not because Iran is a peace-loving nation, but because they realized that the war was going against them. The other school apparently pursued a long war of attrition, believing that in a long war of attrition, Iran had built-in advantages over Israel. They could continue this launching of 3, 5, 10 missiles for a year, keep the Israelis awake, cause harm to the Israeli economy, etc. Now, the first approach prevailed apparently because the regime felt that maybe the cost was too high, or that the presence of Israeli planes every night in the sky of Tehran for weeks on humiliated or for days and weeks, humiliated the regime and maybe even posed danger to the regime's long-term existence. Or they may also believe that the people in Iran could not take it much longer. Anyway, now Iran faces a difficult strategic dilemma, because Iran's strategy of the past 30 years has reached a dead end or a major crisis. They built their strategy on proxies and on ballistic missiles. Amos described and analyzed the loss of the proxies or the defeats of the proxies. The ballistic missiles have proved to be less effective than they had expected. Now, the American bombings of the nuclear facilities deprived Iran of the third very important pillar of strategy, that is the nuclear option or as deterrence. In many ways, Iran today feels probably weaker and exposed to threats more than any time since the end of the war with Iraq. And now the Iranians are facing a dilemma. What should they do, especially on the nuclear issue? Should they decide to go nuclear all the way, at all costs, because this is the only option they have left as deterrence? And the Israeli attacks have proven that indeed, if they had had nuclear deterrence, Israel would not have dared attack them. So it's one option, and we can maybe speak of creating motivation to pursue this option. Another option is to negotiate with the US from a position of weakness. Third option would be to try to exact revenge from Israel by other means. Should they go back to rebuilding the proxies, invest again billions of dollars in the proxies, even though it is much more difficult now to rebuild Hamas or even Hezbollah? Or shift priorities, and maybe finally the Iranian regime would start investing in its own domestic economy and so on. Now, each of these decisions, let me also say another point is take the loss and try to reorganize for better times. That is, take a tactical retreat in the belief that in the long historical march, Iran will achieve its goals. Now, Shiism, the ruling ideology in Iran, has the mechanisms to pursue or justify, legitimize any of these courses of action. Also, each of these decisions may exact a heavy price on domestic scene. Now, the big issue is whether Khamenei, Supreme Leader Khamenei, at his age and state of mind, being a rigid ideological person, but also a very cautious one, will he be able to make the significant changes in Iran's strategy, or would he prefer to continue with the same way? Now, let me end by saying two contradictory things. My instinct assumes that he will not make the necessary strategic changes. But let me conclude that making predictions in the Middle East is a very hazardous business. And therefore, and I don't dare make predictions, especially not after the past 10 years. So we'll have to see, and basically time will tell. Now we can let other speakers say what they should.
Meir, thank you very, very much. We will move to Liora Hendelman-Baavur, Dr. Liora Hendelman-Baavur. She would speak about other aspects relating to Iran.
Okay, so just let me know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So in the time that I have today, I want to address an aspect of the current war that is less talked about, but no less active. The realm of visual politics. Even if the missiles fire stops and the ceasefire holds, the symbolic war will probably continue, and this is why I find it extremely important. And I'm referring to the way Iran uses religious symbolism, public murals, and strategic naming, not simply to accompany war, but to frame and legitimize it, to turn military action into a sacred narrative. Let me just share with you one specific mural. Okay, I hope you can see it in a second. Okay. So exactly 2 months ago, on April 2025, a new mural was unveiled in Tehran's Palestine Square, formerly known as the Palace Square. It showed Pharaoh drowning in turbulent waters. The crown, still visible, marked the figure's identity as a fallen ruler. Above the image, a caption appeared in both Persian and Hebrew, saying, "Once again, Pharaoh will drown." This is not random street art. It is an official state-sponsored installation placed at a major symbolic intersection in the capital, produced by designers affiliated with Iran's Revolutionary Guards. It coincides with a warning from Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, which was released in proximity to the placement of this mural, saying that Zionists should expect God's whip. To anyone familiar with the language of Iranian propaganda, the message was unmistakable. The drowning pharaoh stood in for Israel. The reference to biblical and Quranic imagery reframed the present conflict not as geopolitics, but as a sacred history. And crucially, the drowning is still in progress. Pharaoh's crown hasn't disappeared. The punishment is unfolding. And the inscription in Hebrew suggests it is directed outward, not just inward. This mural is part of a broader campaign, one that began with Iran's missile strikes in April and October 2024, named True Promise 1 and True Promise 2, and has since escalated into True Promise 3. The current war launched in mid-June and continuing through this until this morning with more than 22 waves of missile barrages so far. These names are not just titles, they are signals. The phrase True Promise, El-Waed el-Sadek in Arabic or Va'adeh Sadeh in Persian, was first used by Hezbollah in 2006 to describe the cross-border operation that sparked the Second Lebanon War. Iran's choice to use the same phrase, not once but 3 times, ties its own military actions to the shared resistance legacy. It positioned Iran not only as a participant in the axis of resistance, but as its leader and fulfiller. And there's a deeper dimensions, even more than that. In Shia religious vocabulary, the true promise refers to divine fidelity, the idea that God's justice, even if delayed, is always certain. By naming its missile strikes True Promise 1, 2, and 3, Iran frames the war as fulfillment, not just military escalation, but the realization of a sacred obligation. This is not new for the Islamic Republic. In earlier work, I examined how murals, posters, and political iconography have been used in Iran since the 1980s to shape public space and to shape public emotions within the country. And these are not decorative surfaces. They are part of Iran's official symbolic language. In times of war or crisis, this symbolic infrastructure, and Professor Litvak also referred to it, is activated with speed and precision. Within hours of each strike, posters began to appear showing the transformation of, and here I will just show you another example of another poster that was distributed online and on the social media of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Posters began to appear showing the transformations of Moses' staff into a missile. And shortly afterwards, the office of the Supreme Leader attributed this mural to a poem by Khamenei, and it read, "In your hand is a miracle, fear not the sorcerer's falsehood, cast your staff to the ground and do not retreat from the serpent's path." The reference is clear. This is the Quranic moment when Moses defeats Pharaoh's court by transforming his staff into a serpent that devours their illusions. In Iran's version, the staff becomes a drone, a ballistic missile, or a launch pad. The serpent becomes divine technology. I will just end my part, at least for this part, by saying that these are not just rhetorical gestures. They operate across 3 fronts at once. For the domestic audience, they provide moral coherence. The war is not portrayed as a reactive policy, but as sacred justice, a struggle ordained by scripture. For regional allies, the language of divine promise reinforced solidarity by referencing Hezbollah, quoting Quranic verses, and invoking martyrdom narratives. Iran strengthened its claim to leadership within the resistance axis. And for Israel and the West, these images serve as psychological weapons, presenting Iran's actions not as political threats, but as expressions of unstoppable historical force. So I'll stop here and thank you.
Thank you very much, Liora. So thank you, Liora Hendelman-Baavur, Dr. Liora Hendelman-Baavur from the Dayan Center. Meir Litvak, who spoke before, is also from the Dayan Center. And the next speakers, we'll have several, are all from the Moshe Dayan Center. The first would be Dr. Brandon Friedman, the head of research at the Dayan Center. Brandon?
Thank you, Amos. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Amos. So let me begin by saying that I'd like to send my thoughts and prayers to the families who lost loved ones this morning in Beersheba, just minutes before the ceasefire took effect. And I fully share the sentiments that Amos expressed at the beginning, that the next major goal should be bringing as many of the hostages who are alive home. In terms of what I was asked to speak about, I'm going to have 3 or 4 points on the Gulf states, and then 3 or 4 points on the United States, with your permission. The first point has to do with the attacks on Al Udeid Air Base, or the American side of the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar yesterday. The Gulf states all wanted to stay out of the crossfire in this war. It's important to emphasize that the scenario we saw last night is exactly the one that they feared most. And it's no coincidence that the Saudis condemned Iran's attack on Qatar in much more harsher terms than it condemned the US attacks on Iran's nuclear sites. And that just shows you that for the Gulf, this is a question of family solidarity, even if there is significant tension between Qatar and some of the other GCC states. With respect to Qatar, I think Iran chose to attack Al Udeid because the feeling, and this is just my guess more than based on fact or any sort of evidence, is that Iran probably felt that Qatar owed Iran. Iran played a very important role in helping Qatar survive the blockade that the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Egyptians, and others imposed on Qatar between 2017 and 2021. Without Iranian air and sea space, Qatar would have struggled to survive that blockade. And so the Iranians really helped Qatar survive it. And I think that that was an important dimension. Second, Al Udeid is a symbol of American power in the Gulf. So despite being in Qatar, it is the forward operating headquarters of CENTCOM, the part of the US military responsible for the Middle East. So I think for Iran, attacking Al Udeid was a symbol. And I think that symbols are important for Iran, as we heard from Liora. It's also important to point out that the Iranians knew that the Americans had significant air defense assets around Al Udeid. So the Iranians could feel comfortable that while they were attacking American military installation in Qatar, it was one that was extremely well protected and unlikely to damage Qatar in significant way. And as we all know from the news reports, there were reports that Iran coordinated its attack with senior Qatari officials in advance, and so the Qataris knew it was coming. I haven't yet heard that confirmed from the Qatari side, but it's a reasonable point. And finally, despite the fact that the Qataris knew the attack was coming, it's important to point out that the Qataris on the ground felt afraid, they panicked, and they felt extremely vulnerable when they were seeing missiles coming overhead. That's something in the Gulf that they're, especially in Qatar, they're not used to. In the Emirates, they've experienced it. In Saudi Arabia, they've experienced it from the Houthis. Many of the wealthy Qataris don't have any sort of bomb shelter. And so I think despite all of the theater involved in the attack on Qatar, it did create a great deal of fear within the Qatari population. We didn't see the Iranians make any attempt to close the Straits of Hormuz. There was a lot of public discussion about that. We heard from Josh Krasner a couple of days ago that was unlikely to happen, and I think Josh was right. The most interesting development there was that China seemed to try to exert its influence in discouraging the Iranians from threatening the Straits. There was several very public Chinese signaling on this issue, and it's important to remind our viewers that 38% of the oil that traffics through the Strait of Hormuz goes to China. And so China has a significant interest in that. And finally, as a final point with respect to the Gulf states, they wanted a quick end to this war. And they got it to a certain degree. with the ceasefire, I think that they got what they were looking for, which was they wanted the war to end as quickly as possible. Now that, if I have time left, I'll make 3 brief points about the Americans. I think it's very interesting that Trump chose to name this war the 12-Day War. Now, for us in Israel, the 12-Day War resonates the 6-Day War, right, of 1967. But I think to an American audience, he was sending a different message. The message was that under Trump's leadership, there would be no more forever wars, no more 20 plus years in Afghanistan or a decade in Iraq, that when Trump leads the American effort to get involved, it is quick. And I think it's important to see everything Trump does through the prism of American domestic politics first and foremost. And so I think that the naming of the war, the 12-Day War, was a domestic political message to his American constituency, both supporters and opponents. And there were a significant part of his Republican base that opposed intervention. For Trump, it's a historic win. He sees this perhaps as part of his legacy. We'll have to see how things play out with Iran's nuclear program to determine if that really becomes a historic win for him and a legacy. It certainly seems like it right now. A big question is, where do the Americans try to take this from here? Is that the end of the story for the United States? Does the United States plan to lead a next set of steps diplomatically to turn the immense military success into political achievements? And I think that's really the key question. I don't have an answer for it. I don't think anyone really does at this stage, but we're going to wait and see what Trump wants to make of it. Amos alluded to the Abraham Accords and perhaps an expansion of Israel's relationships with some of the Arab Gulf states. It's a reasonable, it probably is part of the Trump administration's ambitions, but I think that the Arab Gulf states are somewhere different than they were in 2020. I think they're now probably very fearful of getting too close to Israel. They feel like Israel is now the dominant power in the region, and they probably are a little concerned that Israel would throw its weight around in a way that they're uncomfortable. And if particularly the shared enemy in Iran is much reduced, that may reduce the Arab Gulf states' appetite to really pursue close relations with Israel. But all of this is speculation. We'll have to wait and see. Finally, a last point for the Americans, it's also important to say that the Trump administration here is also sending a message globally, and it has ramifications or implications for Russia and the war in Ukraine, for China, and potentially any ambition it might have vis-a-vis Taiwan, and of course to the EU and NATO. And we know that the Americans are meeting with NATO and involved in NATO this week. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Brandon. The next speaker is Dr. Dina Lisnyansky. She would speak about Russia, radical Islam, and probably more interesting things. Dina?
Hello, hi. Hopefully more interesting things, yes. So thank you all for being here. Today is a very important day for us. And I think I will start with Russia, and then we'll go into radical Islam as well. There are a few changes that needs to be attended, and perhaps the first one is the way Russia regards its role in the Middle East. It has been changing throughout the years, especially the last years, and definitely there has been a change after December 8th in 2024, when Syria was changed and the Assad regime, in fact, fell after a serious revolution that occurred there. And today, I would say that Russia is trying to maintain a very solid position in the Middle East in several locations, particularly 3 locations. The first one is, as I already said, Syria, and the second one is Libya, and the third one is definitely Iran. And here is the connection to our today's talk. It regards its role in Iran as a primary strategic presence, not just in one country, but in the whole region. And this strategic presence by Russia is bounded by treaties and also by what it regards as moral obligations to, for instance, defend, if we were talking about Syria, to defend the Christians in Syria, because it regards its role as a historical role ever since the Russian Empire in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. But now if we speak about Iran, then we should speak about the treaties that it has today in Iran, most of them being economical and also sometimes even in terms of security. So if I have to talk about what happened, what occurred just now, then we can see that, for instance, after the U.S. attack, the last U.S. attack on Fordo site in Iran, the first person who was addressed by the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Abbas Araghchi, was, of course, President Vladimir Putin in Russia. And in fact, Araghchi took a plane and he came to Moscow to meet Putin. And this meeting was, of course, very much covered by the media. And during this meeting, I would like to just quote a few things. One of the, I think, most amazing things that were said there were absolutely simplistic. And this was the way that President Putin addressed the problem of Iran right now. He said, we need to think about how to get you out of this situation. Now, a person who understands what he actually means is that, in fact, it means that Putin regards this specific situation as something that goes under also his, let's say, field of responsibility. So if Putin feels responsible for being one of the people who would help Iran to get out of the situation it put itself with Israel and with the US, this means a lot. Now, what does he mean by that? Specifically, he actually means that Russia is in fact in charge, or in many ways in charge, for the nuclear program in Iran. One of the evidences to that, and there are a lot of them, is the fact that Putin was speaking to Netanyahu just a day after June 13, after the Israeli attack on nuclear sites in Iran, and he requested specifically not to harm the 200, this is the real number, the 200 nuclear scientists of Russian descent that are already situated in Iran, especially in Isfahan. So while Israel was, in fact, assassinating some of the Iranian nuclear scientists, Israel had no right to touch or harm the Russian nuclear scientists that were situated in Iran. So this means also that Russia is going to be the country that is going to help Iran to rebuild its nuclear program. And here I would like to quote ex-President Dmitry Medvedev, who tweeted just one day ago, yesterday, and he said, what have the Americans accomplished with their nighttime strikes on 3 nuclear sites in Iran? First of all, he said, critical infrastructure of the nuclear fuel cycle appears to have been unaffected or sustained only minor damage. The second point is that the enrichment of nuclear material, and now, he says, we can say it outright, the future production of nuclear weapons will continue, meaning Russia is going to help with the future production of nuclear weapons to Iran. And the third point that he is making is that a number of countries, he says, are ready right now to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads. So basically, he is stating that Russia will be the country that will not only broker the achievement of a new nuclear program in Iran, but it will also be the one who is going to orchestrate it all from the beginning for the second time. Now, in terms of Israel and radical Islam in the Middle East, and of course Russia with this specific program, we know that once Israel made its strikes in Iran, we saw that there were many radical Sunni Salafis that were, in fact, treating this specific situation as a situation that is somewhat amusing. Why? Because we are speaking about Shiite radicals in Iran and about Sunni Salafi radicals, for instance, in Syria, who are basically jihadis. When we speak about them, we're talking about an ideology that is considering Shiites to be heretics that need to be eliminated. They are not to be taken into consideration while they're building their eschatological ideal world that will bring the demise, perhaps, of other civilizations. Of course, I quote here Salafi groups. And one of the most interesting things that we have witnessed in the last days were podcasts by many, and also videos by many Salafis in Syria right now, who regard this specific war between Israel and Iran as a war that Israel should win. Because first of all, they need to get rid of the Shiite axis that is in fact interfering with their own plans. Now, their own plans are not only to stay in Syria, but also to expand, moreover, to expand to the whole Middle East. And of course, Iran is in the way. So right now, what we have here is another sort of an understanding of the Middle East when we speak about axes. And the three axes that are remaining and that are changing right now with this specific operation in Iran are, first of all, the Shiite axis that was just a few months ago the most dangerous threat to the Middle East. And this specific axis is weakening as two Sunni new axes are on the rise. The first one is the axis of Qatar and Turkey, which is the more pro-Muslim Brotherhood axis. And they are on the rise, of course, and they are trying to be involved a lot in Syria as well. But the most interesting axis for us is perhaps the axis of the Abraham Accords, which are, of course, the more moderate Sunni states that are interested also in a new balance here in the Middle East, while the Shiite axis is declining, they are rising. And today there was a very interesting piece of news that I've heard, and this is the new fact that Syria is on its way. Syria might be on its way to become the next country that would like to join the Abraham Accords. Now, this is a very controversial thing to say, because from the one hand, we understand why Syria would like to be a part of Abraham Accords. We're talking about Julani or Ahmad Ashara, who is basically now considered to be a more pro-Western leader, even though he is originating from Salafi jihadis. But then the thing is that he has a lot of very incontent previously militants who were with him while he was conquering Syria that are now deciding that he is not the right leader for them. So while he might be willing to get into a normalization with Israel, inside his army might be rising a new coup that would end his time in Syria as well. So I would like to conclude this specific brief by telling that on the one hand, we see Russia, on the other hand, we see radical Islam. It might seem that they are not connected, but they are very much connected, even if I mention only one fact here. And the fact is that many of the soldiers in Julani's army are Russian-speaking soldiers who are coming from the post-Soviet region, some of them from the Russian Federation. They're all Muslims, they're all Salafis. And this specific connection makes Russia already an inherent part of the Middle East and not just another superpower that came to be only a colonizing or imperialist power in the Middle East. There is something more into it, more inherent and more, it makes Russia part of the Middle East right now.
Dina, thank you very, very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Eytan Cohen Yanarocak, and as you can imagine from his name, he would speak about Turkey. Hi.
Dear Amos, thank you very much for this distinguished platform. As you mentioned, today I would like to provide you the Turkish angle in a nutshell. First of all, I would like to explain to you how the things are seen from Ankara. First of all, I would like to refer to the Turkish and the Iranian relationship. This is a historical rivalry that we all know that it is originated from the Ottoman and Safavid times. We all know that the Ottomans, thanks to their historical victory of Chaldiran, they managed to stop the penetration of the Shiite into the Middle East, and the rest is history. We all know that, but the history is not disconnected from today's politics. So today, even if these two states are still not engaging in a direct confrontation with each other since 1639, yes, you heard it true, 1639. The Iranians and Turks are not fighting each other since then. But still, we can speak about a rivalry between these two states for the domination of the region. And of course, we all know that recently the Iranians lost their control in Syria, and the new influential player here is Erdogan's Turkey. Apart from that, since the eruption of the war in the Gaza Strip, Turkish foreign policy has gone through from a very huge U-turn. If we were talking about a normalization between Israel and Turkey before the war, because of the current situation in the Gaza Strip, this normalization collapsed. And Erdogan, let me say, upgraded his pro-Palestinian foreign policy into a pro-Hamas one, which is something unprecedented in the Turkish terms. And since October last year, he began to tag the state of Israel as the number one national security threat for Turkey. Also the previous speakers also referred to different players in the region. We have this Turkey-Qatar Muslim Brotherhood axis. We have this the so-called resistance axis of the Iran and the Abraham Accords. Of course, Israel can be seen as a separate entity. Long story short, when we are looking at this large picture, we can say that because of this rivalry, the Turkish administration, they really did like the humiliation that the Iranians experienced. They do see the weakening of Iran as an important milestone for the rise of Turkey. We all know that Erdogan has great expectations, and he has this neo-Ottomanist foreign policy. What is neo-Ottomanism? Neo-Ottomanism is the revival of the Turkish influence slash kind of domination in the ex-territories of the Ottoman Empire. So obviously, if we are talking about history, the Ottomans managed to put aside the Iranians in 1514 with the War of Chaldiran, and then they conquered the whole Middle East from the Mamluks. Until when? Until the end of the First World War. And from the Erdogan's perspective, all of these states that were born in the aftermath of the First World War are artificial states, including the Jewish state of the State of Israel. And therefore, nowadays, with the current circumstances, we can say that yes, Erdogan did enjoy from the consequences of this war, of the humiliation of the Iranians. But at the same time, now the alarm bells began to ring in Ankara, since they already tagged the State of Israel as their number one national security threat. Yes, and they declared it for, if I'm not mistaken, for 5 times in many different occasions. And therefore, now we are seeing that, as we also see it in the Israeli press, while the Iranian challenge, of course, it's not fading away, it's not disappearing, but we can say that it is fading away. Now we can say that the Turkish influence, the Turkish player is emerging as a new challenge for the State of Israel. I'm still not tagging it as a national security threat because at the end, the two countries still enjoy, at least on paper, bilateral diplomatic relations, and Turkey is still not declared as a hostile state by Jerusalem and vice versa. And therefore, in a nutshell, nowadays we see that Turkey is seeking to challenge the state of Israel on various platforms in The Hague, together with South Africa. Economically, they are imposing sanctions. And only 2 days ago, I would like to divert your attention to another important incident that Turkey presided the latest session, the latest summit of the Organization of the Islamic Organization of the Islamic Cooperation. And there, Erdogan made a very important speech, and he said, the destiny of Istanbul and the destiny of Tehran, Gaza, Sana'a, Riyadh, Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem, etc., they are all united to each other. It means that our Sultan has an agenda of a pan-Islamist foreign policy, and he is tending to turn the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation into a body that could deter the state of Israel. And we see the core nucleus of this initiative in Syria. In last March, the Turkish administration, together with the Jordanians, Lebanese, Iraqis, and the Syrians, they organized a new entity called the Neighbors of Syria. On paper, it was designed against the ISIS, but the ISIS is the fig leaf. Now what we are seeing is Turkey is using its international legitimacy, its its status in NATO, that it is considered as a member of NATO, right? And a good friend of Donald Trump, Mr. Erdogan. Yeah. So long story short, when we are all looking at these components, for Israel, it is harder to challenge with this kind of a threat or potential threat, unlike Iran, because Iran's international image is, is not a good image that Israel can challenge it easily. Israel can delegitimize it easily. But in the case of Turkey, Turkey is a member of NATO. Turkey is talking in a constructive language in Syria, that it is saying that it seeks to rebuild Syria, right? So for Israel, it is much more complicated. I believe that in the very near future, the most important focus of the Israeli security establishment will shift from Iran to Turkey. And since we are speaking at the Moshe Dayan Center, even if it's a virtual event, we should now commemorate also Professor Bernard Lewis, who had a prophecy. Unfortunately, he had a prophecy. He said that Iran and Turkey may switch, and they could, Turkey could pose a new threat against the state of Israel. He said it to me, if I'm not mistaken, in 2016 or 17, if I may, maybe I may, if I'm not mistaken, but he said to me in person at Tel Aviv University, and then as a young academic, I told him, no, it cannot be possible. But unfortunately, today I cannot tell that he may not be right. So this is my core problem. Thank you very much for having me. Of course, if you have any other questions, I would love to answer it in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chai, and also thank you for mentioning Professor Bernard Lewis. I think that Dr. Michael Lewis is with us, the son of Professor Lewis and a good friend of the Dayan Center. From now, we are moving to discuss the borders of Israel, or not really the borders, Jordan, the Palestinians, Syria, and Lebanon. And Professor Asser Sasa, who was also the head of the Dayan Center in the past and a very good friend, would begin by speaking about Jordan.
Well, thank you very much, Amos. And thank you very much for the previous speakers who have given me a reason to make a geopolitical note. A note on the changing regional order from things that we have just heard from a number of our previous speakers. I would say the greatest change that has taken place in the Middle East in the last few decades is the replacement of the Arab leaders of the Middle East by the non-Arab powers of the region, Iran, Turkey, and Israel. And it is quite amazing how, as our previous speakers have spoken, how the Arab states were hardly mentioned. And it's all about Israel and Iran on the one hand, and Thai came up with the mentioning of Israel and Turkey, and I would like to say a word about that. As much as the conflict between Israel and Iran is going through a dramatic phase, the outcome of which we don't really know at the moment, but obviously a dramatic change, a weakening of Iran, no doubt, Israel and Turkey are at loggerheads quite openly in the Syrian domain. And I would argue that it is not in Israel's interest to seek a confrontation with another of the non-Arab powers, but rather to seek an accommodation with Turkey about Syria and the region as we move ahead in restructuring our relations with Iran. And here, a word about the Arab countries, and that leads me to Jordan. Amos mentioned the Abraham Accords, and Amos also mentioned ending the war in Gaza. The two are interrelated, and Jordan is at the crux of both of them. And that brings me to the discussion on Jordan, and hopefully I will meet my time commitment. Jordan is has an asset in its geopolitical centrality. Because Jordan is at the center just about of everything. It sits on the Palestinian question. It is between Syria and Saudi Arabia, between Israel and Iraq. Jordan's geopolitical centrality is an asset. Countries support Jordan to remain stable, to keep the region stable. But Jordan's geopolitical centrality is also a liability. Precisely in situations like today, when the region is in turmoil, when the region is in conflict, the Jordanians are terrified of being drawn into the conflict itself, being drawn into the fray, the fear of regional escalation and chaos that can undermine Jordan's stability and its role as an island of stability in this very chaotic Middle East of today. There was a very public condemnation of Israel for attacking Iran. And Israel was condemned for its aggression, its breaching of international law, and of interfering with Iran's sovereignty. But behind the scenes, the regime in Jordan, no doubt, is supportive of Israel's efforts to contain Iran's destabilizing role in the region, of which Jordan is very fearful. The Jordanians have accused openly one of the parties of firing missiles across Jordanian airspace from east to west. Obviously, they're talking about the Iranians, and accusing the Iranians of undermining the kingdom's stability and security. Jordan's foreign minister has said quite openly that Jordan was united with those who did not want Iran to possess nuclear weapons. The Jordanians have spoken with concern about the Iran and the Shiite crescent, as Abdullah called it, for more than 20 years. And the Jordanians in this war, as they did twice last year, intercepted the missiles and drones over Jordanian territory on their way to Israel from Iran. So doing that, one may note, defending Israel essentially against the Iranian missile attacks, despite the popular sentiment there is in Jordan, supportive of Iranian strikes on Israel. There was an article in today's Adustur, one of Jordan's dailies, which had the, I would say, the rather cynical, unfortunate heading, Boom, Boom, Tel Aviv. And it was very supportive of the Iranian attacks on Tel Aviv, written in a rather joyous tone. But Jordan's official message is for a cessation of hostilities, to end the war for the fear that it may introduce some instability into the kingdom itself. And as Abdullah has conducted himself over the last 10, 11 days, meeting with security officials, demonstrating a hands-on approach that the regime was fully in control, mobilizing public support, public figures and politicians to praise the king for his efforts at maintaining the stability and the control of the country. When the US intervened in the war, Jordan expressed concern over the escalation of the conflict, but didn't condemn the United States. Needless to say, very dependent on the United States, and they did not even mention the United States in this expansion of the conflict. And therefore, Jordan has not surprisingly welcomed the ceasefire. But coming back to the Abraham Accords, Jordan keeps on hammering away at the argument, don't forget Gaza. Don't forget the Palestinians. It is not all about Iran. Do not forget Gaza, as the king has said, and others. The Jordanian press is full of it. Nor Israel's actions in the West Bank, which the Jordanians argue are designed to hurt the Palestinian population in the West Bank in order to prevent the eventual emergence of Palestinian statehood. The Jordanians still see the Palestinian issue as the main challenge to Jordanian security. And in conclusion, I link this to the talk about the Abraham Accords and ending the war in Gaza. From the Jordanian point of view, and I would say that this is true of other Arab states too, including the Saudis, there is no furthering of the Abraham Accords until we talk about the day after in Gaza. And the day after in Gaza cannot be spoken about seriously unless Israel, further down the road, not immediately, comes to discussing what it should be doing about the Palestinian issue. It is not going to go away. And the Arab world, as weak as it may be at present, I doubt whether we can talk about conducting a relationship with expanding the Abraham Accords without resuming some thought about what Israel does with the Palestinians. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Asher. We are moving to Dr. Harel Chorev. Is a senior lecturer, a senior research fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center, and would speak about the Palestinians. Harel?
Senior researcher, not a research fellow, but that works for me, no problem.
In Hebrew, it sounds better, Harel.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Amos. So just a few words about the Palestinians and their prospects at the moment. Generally speaking, we see some sort of a mixed feelings in the Palestinian so-called street. On the one hand, a lot of joy during the barrages on Israel. On the other hand, an understanding being connected to, you know, the Arab echo chamber, the wider echo chamber of Israel achievements in this war. And as a historian, I can't help of thinking and comparing to other post-war feelings among the Palestinians during such instances in the past. But to be more specific to the, let's say, the main or the major political forces, namely Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, I would divide it into two. First of all, regarding the effect of the war on Hamas in the way I see it today, I think it will have very little effect on hostage deal and the conclusion of the war in general. And the reason is simple. Hamas got used to the idea that Iran is not, doesn't have its back as they used to think, and they understood it already over a year ago. So in that sense, nothing will come as a surprise to Hamas. They are fighting this war alone in the way they see it. However, in the long run, I have no doubt that it will have a major effect on Hamas and its setting within the, I would say, strategic axis, whatever it will be, but it will not be, I believe, in the same axis they belonged until now, namely the resistant axis, pro-Iranian axis, but rather would probably look for other parties to other countries to be connected with, usually more moderate one. That is Egypt, Qatar, with all its complexity from our perspective, and Turkey. But I think Iran would lose its place as a major patron of Hamas. We need to say that this debate within Hamas existed since 2012, since the civil war in Syria broke out, or more, to be more precise, escalated. When we basically had two parties within Hamas. One is pro, I would say, Egyptian, Turkey, and so on, and the other one pro-Iranian. The fact that the military wing of Ezzedine al-Qassam took over the movement meant also that they took the movement entirely to the Iranian arms. Now, with the weakening of the military wing and the strengthening, I would say almost historical strengthening of the political arm outside of the Gaza Strip, I think we would probably see a shift in this position. Just to give you a glimpse of what we have at the moment in terms of sources, I read an article in Sharq el-Awsat 2 days ago, coming from sources within Hamas, which basically strengthen our latest assessment regarding what is happening within the Gaza Strip and Hamas. They describe a situation where the operational I would say arm of namely the military arm of Hamas got weakened to the point that it's working on a regional, local basis. Every brigade commander decides on the particular action it will take against the IDF, but not on the hostages. The hostages issue was taken out of their hands voluntarily, by the way, following the killing of Muhammad Sinwar, which was currently the last commander of the Ezzedine al-Qassam. At the moment, they don't have a commander, a position called the commander of Ezzedine al-Qassam. They don't. We know that Ezzedine al-Haddad, the commander brigade of the Gaza City, is the most senior guy and experienced there, and by the way, very talented, but he is not declared or recognized as the commander of Ezzedine al-Qassam entirely. So they're working on a local basis, and they gave voluntarily the decision upon the hostages to their political wing, which is, as I said, a historical shift considering what happened in Hamas, I would say, since the killing of Sheikh Ahmed Yassin and Abdelaziz Rantisi in 2004. This is where we can mark the beginning of the shift of moving the strength of I would say the power, the power relations within Hamas from the political wing to the military wing. So now it goes backwards. Regarding the Palestinian Authority, it's as usual much more complex, but in the bottom line, I believe they will become stronger following what's happening, and I think the previous speakers presented it very well. I think the expectations from Israel now with this victory, clear victory over its enemies, would be to also show some winners generous and to proceed and promote at least the beginning of a political solution with the Palestinians. In that sense, the Palestinian Authority, despite all its many weaknesses, and I will be the first one to point it out, what kind of weaknesses they have, so many problems of legitimacy and corruption and many things. Despite of everything, I don't see, even within this current government, I don't see any replacement for this leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harel. We'll now move to Dr. Yahel. Yahel is a postdoc fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center. We currently have 4 postdoc fellows, and we're recruiting the 5th one, and possibly after that, the 6th one. So, Ido?
Yes, hi, can you hear me? So thank you very much, Amos, and thank you for the attendees. So I will speak about Lebanon and Syria. First of all, I will say something in general. When we talk about the favorable strategic conditions to launch this attack, we also need to mention Lebanon and Syria because the changes these two states underwent in the last few months of 2024 were so significant. I don't think that Israel was able to carry out this attack without what happened in these states. So first of all, let's talk about Lebanon. So the fact that Hezbollah was probably not even in the mindset of the Israeli decision makers when they debate whether to go to this attack or not. Like the crown jewel of the Iranian Axis system, Shiite Axis system, was not a factor because of its defeat in the war that took place in last summer or last fall. Is a major event. For years, we said that attack in Iran will most probably bring a wave of missiles from Hezbollah, and this didn't happen. We don't know if it was because Iran ordered Hezbollah to do it and Hezbollah refused, or simply Hezbollah cannot. What we do know is that the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, pretty much did everything in his power to emphasize that he is not going to be part of this war. Just hear what he said on Thursday. He said he went on and gave like a very combative speech, but at the end of the day, he said, look, Hezbollah is not neutral. We stand alongside Iran, and this is it. He didn't say that they will join. He didn't say anything. And then after the American attack, they came out and gave even weaker stance. They said that they are confident in the Iranian ability to fight back. And this is something that was, I don't know, no one ever thought that this is possible just a year ago, that Iran will be under such attack and Hezbollah will be a non-factor. And another thing that we need to consider that after so many years, Lebanon, which was a state, pretty much a state by name only, is becoming now, there are tremendous state building efforts in Lebanon. And they have now a prime minister, Nauf Salam, who is an esteemed prime minister. The previous prime minister, Najib Mikati, was Nasrallah Zlaki. Now he's an independent figure who has very international credentials. And just few hours after the American attack on Fordow, he went and said that given the current military escalation, the Lebanon permanent national interest will be to stay out of this regional war. So he pretty much said to Naim Qassem, look, don't intervene, stay where you are. And Hezbollah, in its current very weak situation, was unable to affect the events. So this is one major development, but I think the most interesting one is what is happening in Syria. So Asher said that in the first 24 hours after the Israeli attack, there was like the wave of condemnation, denouncements. Like all Arab states denounced Israel, condemned its attack, that it will affect regional stability and so on. There is one Arab state that kept silent, Syria. Syria didn't address it. It said nothing about the attack. 2 days after the attack, there was a call by 21 Arab and Muslim countries for a ceasefire. Syria was not part of this call. It was not part of this. It was not on the list. It didn't join the call for ceasefire. But what it did condemn very, very quickly was the Iranian attack yesterday on the American base in Qatar. This attack was answered by immediate Syrian condemnation against Iran and its threat for national regional stability. And it's quite interesting to see this behavior. Another interesting event is that a source from southern Syria, he spoke with Israeli broadcast, with Khan, and he said that the Syrian government, they don't want to, they have no interest in the war between Israel and Iran, but Syria has no objection that Israel will use its airspace to intercept Iranian missiles and drones. And the Syrian government immediately went out and said that Syria never declared such a thing. But the broadcast didn't mention public declaration, just that they have no objection. So the choice of language was, I think, was meant to deliver certain message that Syria really does not, covertly, does not object this issue. So I think, and I think Amos said so in his opening remarks, what we see here is Syria is becoming, I don't know if normalization, I don't know if it's going to be part of this new, it will join the Abraham Accords. I think we have a long way to go there. But they see Iran as a bigger enemy than Israel. And Jolani sees Iran as a bigger enemy than Israel. Israel's resentment towards Iran is huge, is big. Obviously, Iran's behavior and its support in the Assad regime during the civil war and the massacre they carry out against the Sunni population in Syria is still very much entrenched in their memories. It's a very, very recent memory. And I think now we have an ally in the fight against the biggest enemy in the Middle East, which is Iran. And just on May 28, Giuliano Asha, he provided an interview to the Jewish Journal, an American Jewish news outlet. And he says the following, he said, no nation prosper when its skies are filled with fear. The reality is we have common enemies and we can play a major role in regional security. He's not hiding it. He says so. Israel and Syria can be partners in combating Iran's subversive activity in the region. And I think if we are going to talk about the day after, and we talk about Gaza, we talk about Iran, we have to talk about Syria, and we have to talk about Israel policy in Syria, and we have to think how we can draw Syria to become our regional partner. Maybe further down the road, they can join the Abraham Accords and we all go and eat hummus in Damascus. But in the meantime, how can we collaborate to prevent Iran from going back to sit on our border? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ido. Now we're moving to another postdoc fellow, Jonathan Franco, who received his PhD yesterday. So last time it was just Jonathan Franco in the last webinar. Now is Dr. Jonathan Franco. Jonathan, can you deal with the many questions that we had?
Of course. Thank you for this kind introduction, Amos. All right, so we're going to start with you. We received the following question, which you can, I guess, open up to many different directions. Are we confident enough that Israeli intelligence and maybe other factors will be able to monitor and deal with future Iranian nuclear ambitions?
Okay, so the answer about intelligence, and I think that we can take that from October 7, is no, we are not confident. Still, we see how much information and exact information the intelligence has with all the attacks on Iran and in other places like in Lebanon, in Gaza, and so on. So it's clear that we have a very sound information. Still, I think that the more we speak with people from the military, it becomes apparent that now there is different way of thinking in Israel, which is this. First of all, we'll try to get the best information that we can get. Second, if there is a weapon that endangers Israel, that weapon need to be attacked or make sure that it's not there. And that's the responses that we get from military persons about Gaza, about Syria, about Lebanon. Now, of course, it's easy to say, it's harder to conduct, but I think these are the two games that we're speaking about. Now, about nuclear weapons, we have to remember that it's not only exist or can be created in Iran. It existed in other states and it can move to Iran. There are many other ways to bomb different enemies, like not only via missiles, you can do it also, for example, just leaving it in a container in a ship that goes to a harbor or something like that. So at the end of the day, intelligence is important, and it's also important to make sure that Israel is not reaching, again, a situation where prime enemy has significant chances to bomb Israel with atomic bombs. There is currently a debate about what Iran has or hasn't in their, like, kind of that they can create a nuclear weapon. I think we have to wait a bit to have more exact information.
Thank you, Amos. And we're moving on to Professor Meir Litvak. The question we have for you is, so even without making predictions, because you said rightfully that making predictions is always dangerous, but even if we don't make predictions about the future Iranian strategy, given everything that's happened, could you at least explain which national, regional, and international factors might inform the Iranian decision-making in realigning its policy?
Okay, thank you. I'll try to answer it. We can look at certain things. First of all, what will the Americans say? What will the Americans demand? What kind of demands they will raise against Iran? And from decisions, so let's say, on enrichment and supervision. Another very important point is how Russia will behave. Now, Dina spoke about Russian policy, but let me say that the Iranians don't have many expectations from the Russians, but they still were disappointed by the very timid Russian approach. Can they count on Russia to back them if they violate certain things or not? By the way, same thing with China. Another important point is, for instance, the issue of oil prices. Oil prices moved a little bit up at the beginning of the war, but then went down back. Now, the current price of oil is very bad for Iran. It is below the level that Iran needs to balance its budget. Iran will need many billions of dollars now to rebuild its losses or to recover its losses from weapons, etc. And with low oil prices, it will make it much more difficult for Iran to do it. Will they? And then you can see how they will face this dilemma. Of course, the major issue are the internal infighting. Here you can speak of two levels. What will happen within the Iranian elites? Now, Israel dealt a blow to the Revolutionary Guards, and for instance, to give you an example, Israel killed two major generals, okay? Salami and Bakeri. Salami, and here I'm saying it in the civilian, the way how he talks, very much was a thug. Bakeri was seemed to be much more thoughtful, careful person, but interestingly enough, to give an example, 3 weeks ago, he gave a very liberal statement on Iranian policy. We don't know what are the views and conduct of those who replaced them. Now, will these new generals, will they be vengeful? Will they believe that it is their duty or honor to take revenge against Israel for the humiliation that the Revolutionary Guard suffered? Or will there be people who will say, we suffered defeat, but let's first of all, we have other issues. Will Khamenei have control over these people, or will now he be dominated by them? Khamenei is not getting younger. He's not the most healthiest person. And so we don't know. And also, of course, how the Iranian public will react. And here, let me add one point. I'm now temporarily in Washington, and there's a horrible heat wave. Tehran, Iran is going to suffer from very severe heat in the next 2 months, which will exacerbate the suffering of the Iranian population because of electricity shortages, fuel shortages. How will that affect the Iranian public? Will it push the Iranian public to protest or so? We don't know. But what I'm trying to say is that Iran's domestic problems are not being solved. And in fact, they are exacerbated because of the outside the war, and also because of the war. These things may have an impact on the way Iran will conduct its policy. So we can speak of several factors working on different directions, trajectories, and again, we'll have to see how each of them influences the Iran position and movement.
Thank you very much, Meir. We're now moving on to Dr. Liora Hendelman-Baavur. Something very interesting that came up in the questions is you talked about these murals that kind of rely on the story of Moses in Egypt. But as we all know, Moses is a Jewish figure, leading the Jews against let's say, a non-Jewish tyrannical regime. And so the use of Moses here is quite interesting. Could you explain how the Iranians reconcile this theological contradiction when trying to use Moses against the Jews, if we can call it that?
Okay, so this is a great question because it drew my attention when I saw it. It may sound paradoxical to Western ears, especially given the shared heritage of the Exodus story, but this inversion is deeply rooted in a distinct Shia theological worldview. And here I have to mention Professor Meir Bar-Asher, one of Israel's leading scholars of Islamic and Shia thought, and he has shown that early Shia traditions have included the idea that the Shiites are actually the true Israel or the new Israel, the faithful community that has preserved God's guidance. And in this framework, the original Israel, meaning the Jews, lost their theological status by deviating from the divine path. Now, the Islamic Republic draws directly on this idea. It doesn't reject the sacred story of Exodus. It reassigns its roles. So Israel, the modern state, is no longer seen as descendants of the oppressed people of this story, but as Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is the ultimate figure or illegitimate power. In the Quran, Pharaoh is condemned for his disbelief, for his arrogance, for his oppression, his denial of prophetic truth, and his false claim to divine status. He's not only a tyrant, he is a ruler who has usurped divine authority and turned political power into theological crime. Iran, in turn, identifies with Moses. not in a national sense, but in a moral and theological one. It claims the role of prophetic resistance, the voice that challenges oppression, leads the faithful, and fulfills divine justice. So it doesn't seem like a contradiction. And I also saw that someone asked in the Q&A if the Iranian public buys this story or how it reacts to the propaganda. So I would say that the short answer will be that some in Iran do believe the propaganda, many don't, and the state knows that. But the power of this propaganda doesn't rely on universal belief. It functions through ritual repetition, public saturation, and strategic ambiguity. So we can feel the echoes. And they try, of course, to propagate these ideas outside of Iran as well.
Thank you very much for that, Liora. We're moving on to Dr. Brandon Friedman. Would you say that the conclusion and the outcome of the Iran-Israel war that we all just witnessed would somehow reinvigorate or inspire a new Trump administration effort to resolve the Gaza war? Or is Washington kind of viewing these two conflicts as completely separate and unrelated?
Great question. I would caution us all not to get ahead of ourselves, right? The Israel-Iran war is not yet over. We don't know exactly how the Iranians see the next steps. They haven't given up, as far as I know, their ambition to enrich uranium. They still have missiles. They haven't shown any interest in withdrawing support for their militia partners in Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, and arguably the Palestinian territories. And I have yet to see them renounce their ultimate goal of destroying Israel. So perhaps before we know where Iran or the regime stands, or whether the regime will continue in its current configuration, it's hard to say how this war is going to affect the ability to turn Gaza into a political tool that could lead to a more prosperous and peaceful Middle East, right? And that's really the question. So I'm not trying to evade the question. Let me address it directly. I think the notion of the Saudi-Israeli normalization deal spoke to the ambitions of three rulers. Trump, who wants to be remembered as a peacemaker. People have openly discussed his desire for a Nobel Peace Prize. Our Prime Minister Netanyahu, who also is thinking in terms of legacy, and if he was thinking in terms of legacy before October 7th, I think after October 7th, he would like to change how he's perceived, particularly at home. And now he's in part done that with the destruction of Iran's nuclear infrastructure, at least some of it. But I think also he has his legacy in mind, and Saudi normalization, I think, was always a part of that, at least in terms of his own vision. And of course, in Saudi Arabia, we have Mohammed bin Salman, who aims to be king for a long time. He's young, and I think would like to be seen as the Arab leader who delivered Palestinian statehood for the Arabs in a way that all other Arab leaders have yet to do. And that would give him enormous prestige, would legitimize, I think, his ascension to the throne if and when that happens. And I think also to go a long ways towards realizing some of his more practical economic and social liberalization reform programs, which are embodied in his program of nationalism, Vision 2030. So I think there's a potential for Gaza to be a tool to something better, but I think we're a very long way away from that. And I think we should keep our eye on the ball right now, which is Iran, and let's see where that conflict goes in the coming days, weeks, and months, while at the same time doing everything we can not to forget that we have hostages in Gaza that need to be brought home.
Thank you, Brandon, for this. So we're moving on to Dr. Dina Lisnyansky. how important would you say it is for Moscow to actually see the nuclear program in Iran through? Are they just sponsoring it because they want to, gain something financially or politically out of the actual patronage? Or is it important for them to see it through so that Iran will have a nuclear weapon as an end?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It is a very important one. We need to understand the perspective. After the dissolvement of the Soviet Union in 1991, there was a decade when Russia was not dealing with external affairs at all. It was only dealing with its own economical problems and regarding its new role in the region, basically in the near region and the post-Soviet region. But then after 1999, when Putin comes to power and Russia gains more strength, we can see that in the year of 2000, only a year after the beginning of the Putin era, he is reclaiming his own vision, or the old imperial vision of Russia in the world. And then he comes and says during a press conference that the world is out of balance since the dissolvement of the Soviet Union in 1991, meaning that if before that, during the Cold War, there were two polars, in fact, and now after the dissolvement of the Soviet Union, there's only one polar, meaning only the US is the superpower. Then he says the world needs to be rebalanced. We need to regain a new balance, and he does not suggest two polars again. Rather, he is talking about a multipolar world. And then in 2009, he's basically the leading power behind BRICS, that is being founded in order to become a sort of a counterpart for NATO, not only economically, but also geopolitically. And this is me trying to answer your question here, because the reason for the Russians helping Iranians, not only in the nuclear program, but also in all kinds of other military and economical aspects, mostly their interests are not only financial. We need to understand that this is a part of a larger vision of Putin in the world. He wants Iran to be a sort of a balance, a sort of a counterpart to the Israeli power, but not only to the Israeli power, to the Sunni power in the Middle East as well. He actually understands the difference between Shiites and Sunnis, and he also thinks about the possibilities that such a union or such an alliance could bring not only to the region, but also to the whole, let's say, the axis of resistance that is a broader axis of resistance, not just a Shiite axis, but also the Russian, China, Iranian, North Korean axis. Hence the reason for the hastened, perhaps, attempt to rebuild the nuclear program. I do not believe that this would be only a financial aspect. This would have also a kind of a balance aspect to it. But also, I do agree with what Meir said before, that Russia did not help Iran, during the specific attacks of Israel on Iran and then of US on Iran. It only helps Iran when it does not interfere with its own interests. And this is very important to understand, because sometimes many people think that Russia and Iran have only mutual interests. No, they don't. Sometimes these interests are mutual and sometimes they aren't. If we speak about the nuclear program, this is a mutual interest. This is the reason why Russia is helping.
Thank you very much, Dina. I would just ask the speakers to try and keep it brief, because we're starting to go over time, but we do want to hear your responses. So we're moving on to Dr. Eytan Cohen Yanarocak. So you mentioned that Turkey might kind of replace Iran as a primary threat to Israeli security and Israeli policy in the Middle East. However, as some of the questions listed mentioned, Turkey is slightly different in terms of its international standing. It is supported by the US to some extent. It is a NATO member. So the question is Turkey actually free enough? Does it have the freedom that Iran has diplomatically to threaten Israel as much as Iran does?
Okay, that's a good question. First of all, as I already mentioned in my very short lecture, that Turkey's tactics and Turkey's strategy is very different from Iran. Turkey still did not declare any hostilities against the state of Israel. So this lack of hostility is putting Turkey in a gray zone. In a gray zone, you have some advantages and you have some disadvantages. For instance, things being in a gray zone, it is allowing Turkey to have a contact with the Palestinian Authority. They are capable of reaching and being, demonstrating existence in the Jerusalem. And Turkey would not like to lose these kind of important assets. However, when we are looking at the Turkish foreign policy, we also see a very different picture. Unlike Iran, Turkey is not arming terrorist organizations, but Turkey is forging alliances with Israel's neighbors, and it is besieging Israel. This organization called Neighbors of Syria, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq is very far away, and they already became the part of this organization. In addition to that, I also would like to mention that at the end of Eid al-Fitr celebrations, Erdogan also called his Egyptian counterpart, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, and he also wanted to coordinate his moves with the Egyptian president as well. So he will most likely pave the way of Egypt also to this regional alliance. That means that Israel will be sieged from the south, east, and north. And let me only remind you that Turkey has a very strong navy, and it has a shore in the Mediterranean. And I also would like to mention that Turkey has a military base in Somalia, which is also giving me some, question marks regarding the future of the Red Sea. Today, if I would ask you a question, for instance, like 10 years ago, if I would tell you that the Houthis will constitute a huge headache for the state of Israel, would you believe me? Most likely no, right? So I now, because of this war, I want to be very creative, and I'm asking this question whether if Turkey will replace Iran. We will not see an identical copy of Iran, but I'm telling you this is much more complicated than Iran because it falls in the gray zone. And I'll stop here because of the time constraints. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much. We're moving on to Professor Ashel Sisel. One of the main incentives for Jordan to keep the peace with Israel and to sort of, keep it in a high level as much as possible is the security cooperation and the security benefits that it provides Jordan. Do you think that the weakening of Iran's influence in the region might actually serve to disincentivize Jordan from keeping that peace? So one of the main motivations for keeping that peace with Israel with a view to the Iranian axis is now gone. I believe you're muted, Professor Sisel.
No, I don't think this will disincentivize the Jordanians. They have other reasons to keep the security arrangement with Israel. The Syrian problem, for example, is one that I think Israel and Jordan have very common interests about. And needless to say, the Palestinian issue. So I don't think there is a reason for the Jordanians to back away from that. The problem that Jordan does have in the security arrangement with Israel comes from somewhere else. and that is Israel itself. There is a school of thought in Israel that is quite strong in the present government that thinks that Palestine ought to be in Jordan. And that the solution of the Palestinian question is not in a two-state solution, but in somehow restructuring the Jordanian kingdom. And the Jordanians are extremely concerned about that. And that could interfere with a peace treaty with Israel more than anything else, I would think. And when I spoke about Jordan and the present crisis, even when they're talking about Iran and Gaza, they still mention the West Bank as an area of difficulty with Israel because of Israel's policies in the West Bank, which the Jordanians fear will directly affect them. So I think the interest that they have in security with Israel is as it was before, for an array of other reasons also. But also, I think the threat to that is very often what Israelis do and say on the Palestinian question, which troubles the Jordanians no end.
Thank you very much. We're moving on to Dr. Harel Chorev, and friends, please try to keep it a lightning round because we really are running out of time. So Dr. Harel Chorev, if Hamas truly does shift away from Iran's patronage, as you propose, to another patron, do you think that this could also jeopardize Hamas's cooperation with Hezbollah? Or is that partnership strong irrespective of Iran's role within Hamas?
I think it really depends on Hamas options. If it'll have options, other options, yes, I can see that happening. It actually happened again, regardless to the war with Iran. It happened through the fact that was just recently, I think 2 days ago, exposed by Ben Caspit, that how to say it shortly, Sinwar killed Nasrallah eventually. Sinwar killed Nasrallah with his, I would say, independent plan. And we know that the initiative of the war was taken independently by Hamas. And they asked Hezbollah to join, and they joined, and we know how it all ended. So it created a lot of, I think, bad blood between the two organizations that basically now shared the fact that both of them are fighting for their survival. Hezbollah a little bit less, but I mean, if we're talking about Hezbollah, there is a clear evidence that they were defeated. And I had an argument with a debate, a debate with let's say a senior journalist just a few hours before the war has started, and everybody knew that it's coming and so on and so forth. And he said, I don't agree with you that Hezbollah was defeated. I said, well, I guess we're going to have the ultimate test within days or so. If Hezbollah will join Iran and fulfill its destination from the very beginning, okay, as the second blow, I would say, aircraft carrier of Iran, then we can say that it was not defeated. If it will not, then it's defeated. So I think in that sense, these two players are extremely weak. And at the moment, at least, I don't know, in the foreseen years, I don't see them go again to the same kind of failed strategy of France unification. But, you know, never say never.
Okay, thank you very much. We're moving on to Dr. Yahel. Last question for this evening. Does El-Jolani's regime in Syria take any active action against Hezbollah in Lebanon at present? And if so, do you think that its efforts against Hezbollah might increase given Iran's recent demise?
Yes, but the answer is yes. Jolani's feelings about Hezbollah is pretty much similar to his feelings about Iran. And first of all, they always intercept weapons smuggling from Syria to Lebanon, and they are very public about it. Pretty much every week they have they publicize pictures of the weapons and ammunition they captured. And they also, in the first months after the revolution, there were events of exchanging fire between the Syrian army and Shiite elements from Lebanon. And I expect it's going to continue. I don't think that Iranian demise is going to affect it. Maybe it will affect Iran's effort to rehabilitate Hezbollah, and the byproduct will be that there will be less weapon to intercept. But Jolani has very strong anti-Hezbollah feelings, and it's not, again, also because of Hezbollah's support of Assad during the civil war. And I don't think the war, this 12 days war is going to change something about this feeling or his conduct.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I'm handing back to Professor Amos Nadan.
Yes, thank you for staying with us. I'll forward it to Professor Litvak, just to mention that there are 626 days that we have hostages in Gaza, and we really pray to have them back. Meir. Meir?
I think Meir might be offline.
So he's offline, yeah. We agree that he would say to you, thank to all the lecturers, so I'll say that instead. Thank you all the lecturers, thank you, the audience, the people who support the Dayan Center. And we really hope that it's over with Iran. There are still other open things that we really, really hope to see that they are done, and we can speak about a much brighter future. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jonathan.